Live from the Glen Estee Performing Arts Center in Clermont County's Union Township, this is the 2010 Ohio 2nd District Congressional Debate.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Clyde Gray, and for the next hour, I'll be moderating tonight's debate between Republican Gene Schmidt and Democrat Surya Yalamanchili. We'll bring the candidates out in just a few moments, but first, a little bit about them.
Gene Schmidt is a Republican. She is 58 years old. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from the University of Cincinnati. Before entering politics, she worked as a school teacher and fitness instructor. She has served as a township trustee in Clermont County's Miami Township, as well as an Ohio state representative. She has represented the 2nd District in Congress since 2005. She and her husband, Peter, have one daughter, and they live in Loveland. Democrat Surya Yalamanchili is 28 years old. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in finance from Rutgers University. He started his own internet company at the age of 15 and worked as a brand manager for Procter & Gamble and marketing director for LinkedIn. He's never held elected office. Mr. Yalamanchili is single. He lives in the East End.
The audience here at the Glen Estee Performing Arts Center has agreed to be perfectly silent tonight, except for this moment when they join me in welcoming Gene Schmidt and Surya Yalamanchili. Thank you. The candidates will be fielding questions tonight that have been submitted by the public as well as those posed by our panel of journalists. So let's meet them right now. They are Inquirer Deputy Editor Ray Cookless, WVXU News Director Mary Ann Zalesnik, and Tom McKee of 9 News. This debate will be conducted under rules agreed to by the campaigns. They are:
each candidate will have 2 minutes to deliver an opening statement. Then the questioning begins. For each question, each candidate will get a 90-second response, with the first candidate also receiving 30 seconds for rebuttal. The rules do allow for follow-up questions at the moderator's discretion. In the event of a follow-up, each candidate will receive 30 seconds for a response. Each candidate will then get 2 minutes apiece for a closing statement.
The League of Women Voters is here keeping an eye on the time for us this evening, and of course it's my job to stop the candidates if they run over. As I've said before, it's a job I enjoy doing. A coin flip prior to tonight's broadcast determined the order in which the candidates would speak, and the first opening statement goes to Mr. Yalamanchili. You have 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for the audience. It's a pleasure to be with you here tonight. The question that I've gotten time and time again as I've traveled across the 2nd District over the past year has been why? Why are you running for Congress? Why in this economy have you quit your job and are you living off savings to do this? And the reason for that is a very simple reason, and I think it's something that probably a lot of you in the audience listening on TV and here in the audience live can relate to. It's a matter of principles and how we were raised. What will you stand for? What will you stand up for? My youngest nephew, Lincoln, is 2 years old. And when I think about in 20 years when he graduates from college, what kind of America is he going to go into? What kind of jobs will be available? How much will the debt be? And when I thought about the people who had made sacrifices for me, my parents, my mom who had worked the midnight shift at the post office 6 nights a week so I could go to college, and others who sacrificed so much for me, I thought it would be selfish of me to basically say, well, I'm glad that things worked out for me. And so that's why I'm doing this. And over the past 5 years since Congresswoman Schmidt, my opponent, has been in Washington, we've seen the debt rise by $6 trillion. We've seen the unemployment rate nearly double, and she's taken $1.5 million from the special interests. And this, frankly, is not good enough. It's failed our citizens, and Washington has done just that. And we've seen unprecedented voter anger across the country because we know that we do deserve better. And so I'm standing up for the people who believe that the next generation should have the same opportunity that we do. that $13 trillion in debt is unacceptable. A 17% unemployment rate, an underemployment rate, people have stopped looking for work, is just not acceptable. $3.5 billion that's going to Washington to lobby, essentially legalize bribery, is just frankly unacceptable. And so that's why I'm running for office, because we need accountability in Washington, and I intend to bring my private sector experience to bear. Thank you.
Mr. Yalamanchili, thank you. Mrs. Schmidt, you now have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Well, thank you. I'd like to thank the sponsors of tonight's forum, the distinguished panel, the folks watching, and my opponent. I hope we have a lively and serious discussion about the issues before us. There can be no doubt about the importance of this election. I believe we are at a crossroads in our nation. 2 years ago, people frustrated with the Bush administration voted for change. But this is not the change they wanted. They exchanged an administration that amassed over $2 trillion in debt in 8 years with an administration that has amassed nearly $3 trillion in debt in just 20 months. And the appetite for the Democrats in Washington to continue spending continues. But my frustration and the frustration of the folks of the 2nd District goes deeper than that. Folks wanted real health care reform that would reduce the cost of health care. Instead, they got mandates that will drive their health care costs up. People wanted us to find ways to move our economy forward and create jobs. Instead, we got saddled with a stimulus bill that's going to put a debt on us and our children and our grandchildren of $1.2 trillion and chronic unemployment in Ohio that exceeds 10%. As frustrated as I am, and I voted against all of those policies, Americans are even more frustrated because they see a Washington that doesn't listen to them. Political folks say that this is going to be an election about who controls Congress. I say this is an election about putting the people in America back in control of Congress. As your representative, I'm going to continue to work tirelessly for you. I'm going to continue to listen to you and to make sure that you control Congress. That's what you expect, and that's what I'll deliver. Thank you.
Mrs. Schmidt, thank you very much. The Inquirer's Ray Cookless has the first question this evening, and that question goes to Mr. Yalamanchili.
Hello, Mr. Yalamanchili. On several key issues such as corporate taxes and health care reform, your views do appear to be somewhat at odds with the House Democratic leadership. And as you've indicated already here tonight, you're running as a strong free market private sector candidate. Why then, my question is, why then do you think of yourself as a Democrat, and if you are elected, will you remain a Democrat while you're in office?
And sir, you have 90 seconds for your response.
Well, I think the most important thing to keep in mind here in this question is the fact that both parties have failed America. They've gotten away with a magical scam that basically they both go to Washington and they agree to basically burn the place down to keep themselves warm and to line their pockets. And then after that, they agree to go back to on Election Day and say it was the other guy's fault, and that's what they've done. Congresswoman Schmidt, my opponent, has been here for 5 years. She's been in Washington. A Republican president, a Republican House, a Democratic president, a Democratic House. The results are the same. Unemployment rises, the debt rises. She did vote to bail out the banks. I mean, there are a number of things that cross party lines that just frankly have made Americans sick. I've said the only way we're going to rebuild our economy is by fair trade policies, and we need the right tax and regulatory policies. It's structural issues that we have with our economy, which is why we have record unemployment. Frankly, neither party has dealt with that. Neither party has addressed it. This isn't a Democratic Party issue or a Republican Party issue. It's a Washington issue. Congresswoman Schmidt said she wants to put people back in control. Yet she's taken $1.5 million from the special interest groups over the last 5 years. I haven't taken a single penny from any special interest group this year. Not a union, not a corporation PAC, nothing. No transfers from committees. I am the only major federal candidate in the country who's running for Congress who has done that. And if you want to talk about putting people back in control, that's how you do it. Innovative solutions and by not catering to the special interests.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Schmidt, you now have 90 seconds.
Well, actually, there is a clear difference between Republicans and Democrats, and I think it is echoed in this election. I'm not going to say that we were any Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts when Republicans had control, and quite frankly, I wasn't there for the majority of that. But I will say this, since the Democrats have taken control, our spending has gotten out of control. 62% of our GDP is going to go to paying off our debt this year alone. That, my friends, is unsustainable. When the public wanted a health care bill that would reduce the cost of health care, they got a 2,000-page boondoggle that raises costs, puts more taxes on America, on small businesses, has 159 new boards and commissions, new rules, new regulations, and creates so much uncertainty in Washington that the folks that want to invest in America are afraid to invest in it. But the Democrats went further. They wanted to pass an energy bill that will tax each and every American on their energy and double tax and triple tax some of our folks that are the business owners and make us less competitive with the rest of the world. The final straw, I think, is the fact that this Congress, the folks that are in charge, want to continue to spend. When I go back to Washington, Mrs. Pelosi wants me to spend an additional $14 million, and the president another $50 billion, $14 billion and $50 billion. Folks, like I've said all along with this Democratic-controlled Congress,
Mrs. Schmidt,
I'm saying
sorry.
no.
I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. Mr. Yalamanchili, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad that on November 3rd that we're going to bring my opponent back to the 2nd District because she's starting to sound a lot like the very woman she just referred to, Nancy Pelosi. There's a culture in Washington of fierce partisanship, that the other side is always wrong, that we can't solve our problems. I reject that completely. I've said that if I don't introduce legislation to cut the debt and to help create the trade, tax, and regulatory conditions to bring back American manufacturing, I won't run for re-election. That's accountability. It's not cheap talk. Because politicians say the right things, and when they get there, they do nothing. It's just partisan garbage.
All right, thank you, sir. WVXU News Director Mary Ann Zalesnik has the next question for Mrs. Schmidt.
Representative Schmidt, Congress continues to be more and more partisan. After this election, it's likely to get worse. How can the country move forward without compromise, without the two sides working together?
Well, I believe if we get a new Speaker of the House, we will work together. I find it funny that you want to refer to me as Nancy Pelosi. I am no Nancy Pelosi in any way, shape, or form. But having said that, the environment in Washington is built up to a point that I think is a boiling point, where nobody wants to work with each other, and the folks that are in charge now have refused to allow one single Republican idea to surface on major issues that have gone forward. So we are at a crossroads. But putting Congressman Boehner in charge, I think, will bring us a new day. I've seen him work among our own caucus. He's not an arm twister or a backbreaker. He's a guy with a common sense solution. He brings people together on issues and finds ways that we can find common ground. That's what we need in Washington. And he has said if he is given the gavel, he is going to allow open debates on the House floor on issues. We haven't seen that in a long time. We had it when I first got there, but it ended under the reign of Mrs. Pelosi. So, I think that there is a new day ahead of us with new leadership and with the new folks that are coming in, and I want to continue with that because we should be working together. That's what America wants.
Mr. Yalamanchili, you have 90 seconds for your response.
Thank you. Well, I think this is a great illustration of something that I call parrot politics, because you could teach a parrot to say the right things. You could teach the parrot to say, cut taxes, smaller government. It doesn't make that parrot a conservative. My opponent just referenced Congressman Boehner, and Congressman Boehner was one of the architects of the contract with America, a contract that sounds very good. But you know what? One of the provisions in that contract was term limits. Yet Congressman Boehner's still there. This has failed Washington. It's not failed Republican or failed Democrats. It's a system that is just utterly and completely corrupt. I've rejected it in not taking the Democratic talking points. Republicans, including my opponent, has constantly derided health care reform. There is a lot wrong with health care reform. I said I would take it in the direction of a free market solution. However, they use it as just a singular blunt object to keep whacking over the head of anybody that comes in the way. It's a talking point. It's a scorched earth policy to guarantee we don't make any progress. Democrats use privatizing Social Security as their example because one Republican, a brave Republican named Paul Ryan, had the audacity to actually introduce legislation. things aren't right with that bill that he proposed. Not everything is great about it, but at least he's putting forward an idea. And so I said I will reject that. That is the wrong way of going about it. You've already heard tonight the partisanship, the continuing to slam Democrats as if Democrats are everything that's wrong and Republicans would magically fix it. Parapolitics is what's wrong. Washington is what's wrong. That's what we need to fix.
Your rebuttal, Ms. Schmidt?
I believe the only way we can fix Washington is to have an honest and open and lively discussion. That is what has been missing in Washington. It's been building up for a long time, but quite frankly, that discussion ended when Mrs. Pelosi took the reins. You want a health care bill that works, then let both sides work on a health care bill. You want to move this economy forward, then let both sides work on it. That has stopped under her reign. That's not partisan. That's a fact.
Thank you. 9 News reporter Tom McKee has the next question this evening for Mr. Yalamanchili.
Thank you, Clyde. What is the unemployment rate right now in the 2nd District, and what plans do you have to provide a safety net to those that have lost their jobs or may be living in poverty right now and rely on food stamps and food banks and other forms of assistance to go from day to day?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tom. And unemployment should be the #1 issue. The fact that we have a manufacturing base that's decimated should be the single biggest issue in this election. The unemployment rate in the 2nd District is much higher than the national average. It is around 10%. And that is just a tragedy when you consider the impact that it places on families. It's an even greater tragedy when you consider the fact that the U6 rate, which is something the Bureau of Labor Statistics releases, that counts the people who have given up looking for work. It's a term called exhaustion. And when you count the people who are underemployed, if you're talking about an engineer that's working at McDonald's, they're not counted in the official unemployment rate number, but they're underemployed, or somebody who would like to work full time and is getting fewer hours. So it's a big issue, and we need to actually pass legislation that addresses it, that it addresses the structural unemployment problems we have. We've had trade policies that have devastated our country. We've got a manufacturing base that's been hollowed out by competitive practices that are grossly unfair and illegal under trade agreements, like currency manipulation, illegal technology transfers. We need to fight back against these things. And then we need to overhaul our tax code and our regulatory code so that our businesses can actually compete. It's outdated. It's from a time 50 years ago, 75 years ago, when the only real competition that our businesses faced, a business here in Ohio would face maybe from a business in New York or from Kentucky. So when you layered on regulations and taxes, it didn't hurt their competitiveness. In a global landscape, it does, and we need to address these issues.
Mrs. Schmidt, you have 90 seconds.
Well, the unemployment rate in our district actually varies. There are 7 counties. The lowest county is Warren County with just under 9% unemployment, and the highest county is Pike County, which is just under 14%. But those are the numbers that show the unemployment rate is actually higher, much higher in the eastern parts of my district. But having said that, knowing what the unemployment rate is one thing, doing something about it is another. And what we need to do is to create a certainty in the marketplace so that people that want to invest in America will invest in America. What has happened under this administration is an administration that is putting out so many new rules and regulations that make businesses concerned about the tax consequences they're going to face, the health care costs they're going to face, the energy costs they're going to face, the regulations that may be placed on them, and a debt that continues to grow that might put them in jeopardy of more taxes. You know, there's a lot of wealth out here in America to invest in America and grow jobs, but they're frankly holding on to their wallets. I've heard from business people, large and small, across this district and across this nation. They say there's so much uncertainty, they're not willing to invest at this point. Remove the uncertainty, and I believe you're going to see job growth soar.
Thank you, Mrs. Schmidt. Mr. Yalamanchili, you have 30 seconds to rebut.
The biggest problem is that there is certainty, and that certainty is that we have failed policies. We have failed trade policies. We have failed tax policies, and we have failed regulatory policies. As long as we keep sending the same people to Washington that have proven that they're incapable of taking on our big challenges, it'll never change. Just a month ago, a bill came up on the floor of the House to address China's currency manipulation. The majority of Republicans voted for it, 99. Congresswoman Schmidt voted against it. That's not protecting American jobs. That's siding with China.
Thank you. Ray Cookless of the Inquirer is up next with a question for Mrs. Schmidt.
Can I respond to that China question first?
We'll go with Mr. Cookless's
We'll go
question.
with this one here and then keep going. I'd like to get onto the health care reform issue because that's a huge one, obviously, for everybody in this country. Today, Senator Coburn said that what the Republicans should do, their strategy should be just to keep submitting one repeal bill after another on the health care reform law. And others, like Senator Gregg, say that what they should do is focus on fixing parts of the law that's in place already instead. Given that President Obama would likely veto any kind of effort to repeal or defund the law, what do you think the strategy should be on this?
You have 90 seconds.
I've read the bill, and I can tell you this, that the intent of this bill is to go to a single-payer system.
Okay, we understand. Continue.
I've read the bill, and I can tell you the intent of this bill is to go to a single-payer system. What we have to do is repeal it and replace it with something that actually works. This 2,000-page bill has 159 new bureaucracies, new agencies that are going to be rule makers. It has 19 hidden taxes in it. It has a 1099 provision that's going to cost small governments and business owners a paper nightmare. And it doesn't do anything to reduce the cost of health care. In fact, because of the mandates that are put in this bill, it only makes health care costs rise. We have to begin to repeal and replace it with common sense solutions that will work. What are those solutions? Well, first and foremost, let people go across state lines and buy their health care. It's going to lower their health care costs. Let people expand their health savings accounts, because people that use them generally understand the cost of health care and are wiser about the use of it. And let's get the big gorilla out of the room and really go after tort reform so that doctors don't have to use defensive medicine and can actually make it patient-centered. These are common-sense solutions. They have to begin now. But
Thank
they
you,
can't
Mrs. Schmidt. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt now, but Mr. Yalamanchili, you have 90 seconds for your response.
There is a lot wrong with the current health care bill. I've said that before. When I came to talk to your newspaper, one of your editors tweeted out on the internet saying that Yalamanchili says it's a crappy bill. And there's so much that's wrong with this bill. However, it's a lie when people come to you and they say they're going to repeal it, because it's just not going to happen. You're not going to repeal the fact that 25-year-olds right now who can't find work in record numbers due to the unemployment rate are going to be taken off their parents' insurance, that people with pre-existing conditions all of a sudden are going to lose their insurance. This stuff's not going to happen. But it's critical that we need to evolve the bill into a place that will decrease costs. So I've said, let's take it to the Wyden-Bennett, a bipartisan health care bill that would decrease costs, because what it does, it's a private market solution that increases competition in the health care marketplace. When you combine that with prescription drug negotiation and tort reform, and you actually have insurance companies competing, you will see costs come down. And that will be the big thing that we need to have happen. And I said, if elected, I would do that in Washington. I will help lead getting a bipartisan group of people to push that bill, just like it was a bipartisan bill that was sponsored. If we had leadership on both sides of the aisle that stepped up and pushed that bill, that would be the current bill that would be in law, and we wouldn't be having this discussion. Unfortunately, there's a giant failure of leadership in Washington today, and the bill that we do have has a number of flaws and a number of holes, and which is why no matter who gets elected, we're going to take that on. There's a question of whether it's a practical solution or you're going to have partisan bickering. I'm saying let's take it to a free market solution to drive down costs.
30 seconds to rebut.
First off, Wyden-Bennett is not a free market solution because there are mandates in the bill. It forces you to buy insurance, and it forces a threshold of coverage. You know, anytime you force an American to do something, that's not free market. And anytime you say to an insurance company, you have to put this provision in your insurance plan, that's not free market. Let's work towards real free market solutions. Some of the things that I've already mentioned, associated health plans, getting tort reform, allowing people to expand their health savings accounts, things that will actually drive down the cost of health insurance.
WVXU's Mary Ann Zalesnik now has a question for Mr. Yalamanchili, and you have 90 seconds to respond to that question.
Mr. Yalamanchili, the 2nd District is large and it's quite diverse if you go across all of the counties. How do you go about representing people with so many different needs?
It's a great question, because the district is 7 counties and it goes all the way to Pike and Scioto counties. And the big thing, I think, the one single thread that lies throughout all of this is the fact that jobs is the biggest issue, the economy. And so I think rebuilding manufacturing has a big impact on the areas out east and also here in Cincinnati in this area. And so I think that when you represent people, the biggest thing that you want is you want to hear their voice, and you want to make sure their voice is heard in Washington, not the special interests. The $1.5 million my opponent has taken from special interests is a perfect example of that. It's why you vote for things like hundreds of billions of dollars, nearly $1 trillion, for banks. And when the time comes to vote to regulate these same banks, you vote no. You say, no, we don't want to intervene in the private market, but we're okay giving them almost $1 trillion. This kind of behavior is inexcusable no matter where you are in the country. And so I think for the district, people want to be heard, and people have the same concerns. They're concerned about our debt, the fact that it's $13 trillion and it's growing by tens of trillions of dollars when you look at the Congressional Budget Office's projections. They're concerned about unemployment and the fact, again, that we're at a real unemployment rate of 17%. And they're worried about how they're going to feed their families, how their kids are going to get jobs, how their kids are going to pay for college. These are just common concerns that you share, whether you're in Cincinnati or whether you're in Portsmouth on the eastern side of the district. And as I've spent a lot of time out there, especially in Portsmouth, I've talked to people, and their concern is jobs. And they want to know, why are all the jobs going overseas? Why are we borrowing from China to buy things that we used to make that they're now selling to us?
Mrs. Schmidt, 90 seconds.
You know, one of the first things I do when we get done voting in Washington is I head home. And I head home not just to be with my family, but the folks in this district that I love so dearly. Yeah, it's a diverse district. We have one of the wealthiest communities, Indian Hill, and one of the poorest communities in Pike County. And I see all sides of my district almost every single weekend. And I talk to the folks, but it doesn't matter where they come from. They have some basic needs. First off, they want Washington to listen to them. And secondly, they want us to put things in place that will grow our economy and allow them to have a job and keep the job that they have. That's what the folks in this district want. And that's what I'm trying to accomplish in Washington. You know, you're right. We haven't moved the needle. But it's not because of me, because I fought to move that needle forward. I fought to put provisions in that will allow people to invest in America so that we can have jobs. Unfortunately, I'm in the minority. There are only 179 of us. It takes 218 people to get a vote accomplished in Washington, and his side has the votes. So yeah, I can kick and scream, and I do. And I carry the voice of my people to Washington. But until the other side listens, nothing's going to change.
30 seconds to rebut.
I think you heard it all right there in his side. I'm on your side. That's the only side that matters to me. That is the only side.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, no displays. Thank you.
Abraham Lincoln said when asked about God, I hope God is on our side. And he said, no, we should hope we're on God's side. I'm not on the Democratic Party side. I'm not on the Republican Party side. The only person's side I'm on is the voters of the 2nd District, the people, which is why I took no special interest money. We're tired of soundbite Washington. We need solutions, Washington. As long as we have politicians who just the other party, this is what we're going to end up with. And you're hearing this rhetoric over and over again.
All right, sir, thank you very much. A reminder, those displays take time away from the candidates. Please respect our ground rules. Thank you very much. Tom McKee has a question now for Mrs. Schmidt.
Because the 2nd District has so many farms and farm families, a major concern of these folks is the death tax or estate tax right now. Many say that if we go having the exemption to $1 million and 55% tax after that, it could be the end or the death of the family farm as we know it. What's your position on this key issue right now?
I've said all along we need to repeal it. In fact, it won't be 55% because by the time you get done with Ohio, it'll be more like 65 or 68% with all the provisions that are in there. We need to repeal the death tax completely. Why do we collect this and ruin the opportunity for family farms to stay in place? What happens in parts of my district are people are growing their farms, and when they die, the ground is not valued at what they're using the ground for. The ground is valued at what it could be used for. And so they can't keep it because the tax is placed on them they can't afford. What we need to do is to eliminate the death tax. Really should be looking at all of the tax policies put on by the Bush administration and make sure that all of them continue into the future and not just stop them at the end of December 31st, 2010. Because it's not just going to be the farmers who are going to see their wallets robbed. It's going to be every single American. This is just an opportunity for Washington to find a way to increase taxes so they can increase spending. I say no to the death tax, but I also say keep the Bush provisions in place. Now is not a time in a soured economy to raise taxes on anyone.
Mr. Yalamanchili.
Well, the tax code is a disaster. It's just an absolute disaster. And I think that's the real question here. One, to answer the question directly about family farms, there should be an exemption so family farms can be passed down from generation to generation. But the real issue here is fundamental tax reform. Our tax code is a joke. It keeps our companies not competitive, uncompetitive in a global marketplace. And it's also confusing for us just to go by. I mean, there's no reason we can't fill out our own tax forms, and this needs to be a multi-billion-dollar industry. There's been a bill that was introduced, again, a bipartisan bill. The Wyden-Gregg bill for tax reform. It didn't get anywhere. There's no appetite for bipartisan solutions. Instead, we have people who say his side wants to do this, her side wants to do that. It gets us nowhere. The longer we keep electing career politicians who only care about scoring political points and electing more of their members, they have no incentive to work with people from the other side. They have no incentive to solve big problems. My opponent has been a politician for 20-plus years. What you get when you have career politicians is they go through the motions. They say the right things. Everybody says the right things when they're running for office. And when they get to Washington, nothing changes. No big changes happen. No clapping, please. No big changes happen. And that's a huge issue. We have huge national challenges. $13 trillion in debt, a real unemployment rate of 17%, and we have $3.5 billion spent lobbying Washington every year. If you wonder why it seems like for some companies it comes up heads, I win, tails, you lose, well, it's because of that. We need to fix the big challenges, and that's the only way we can move forward as a country.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your support. Ms. Schmidt, your rebuttal, please.
Well, it's not just family farms that are affected by the death tax. It's also small businesses. Anybody that owns a small business is going to be affected by an increase in the death tax, and that's why these policies should continue. But I'd like to add that any time you are in a recession and you raise taxes on anyone, it only makes the recession worse. All you have to do is look at the FDR administration to understand that when you have a soured economy, you don't raise taxes on anyone, including the dead.
All right, Ms. Schmidt, thank you very much. We asked you to submit your questions online, and here is the first of those questions. What specific thing would you do as a member of Congress that would bring back manufacturing jobs to the 2nd District? Your response, Mr. Yalamanchili.
I love this question because my big issue has been manufacturing jobs and has been trade and tax and regulatory policies. I think there's a few things we need to do to address this. First, on trade. Right now, basically, we're in an economic war, and really, I don't think that's putting it too starkly. We're in an economic war, and other countries basically have declared war. And what they've done is they've passed tariffs. They've been manipulating their currency to keep costs down. They've been forcing technology transfers. They do all of these things to our manufacturers in their markets so that they can build up their own challengers. And what we do is we turn the other cheek and we say it's free market, free trade. The problem with free trade is the only people that lose are American workers and American companies. The profit margins go up of big corporations and our unemployment rate goes up too, which is why we see what we see now and the economy is not recovering. And so we need fair trade provisions. Trade should grow the overall pie of the world economy, and trade should absolutely do that. However, when everybody doesn't play by the same rules, the only way they do play by the rules is when you're willing to stand up for yourself. And that's what we need to do. So fair trade is critical. Tax and regulatory conditions in our country are designed, again, for 75 years ago. We need to get to a place where we can be globally competitive. We have one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world, and that's just not going to cut it. So we need to recognize that putting all the regulatory and tax burden on companies just doesn't cut it, and it makes sure that we're not competitive. And it's only when we introduce legislation to fight all three of these things, trade, tax, and regulatory policies, that we can rebuild manufacturing jobs here in the 2nd District.
Ms. Schmidt, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. You know, manufacturing has been the lifeblood of the United States, and we continue to see it eroding. And it's not just the tax policies that were there before this administration. It is now new tax policies and new regulations that I believe are going to make us even less competitive with the rest of the world. You know, we are the innovators of the world. We're the smartest and the best when it comes to creating and making things. And that's always been our edge. But what has happened in the last 2 years are policies that are going to make us less competitive. All you have to do is look at the cap and trade policy that was passed by the Democrats in the House. This is a bill that will tax each and every individual and each and every business with an energy tax that is only going to drive up their costs of doing business and make us even less competitive with the rest of the world, because guess what? We can't control what the rest of the world does. What we really have to do is first peel back the policies that have been put in place in the last 2 years that have made us even less competitive, and then go back and look at ways that we can be competitive. And let's look at fair trade. You know, my opponent wants to jab me for the China trade bill. Well, let me tell you, this was a bill that was supposed to address the currency problem, but it didn't address it. But what it did was, and the Senate wasn't going to pass it, what it did was it allowed us to be now put into a position of having a trade war with our third largest trading partner. And it didn't address intellectual theft or the fact that China refuses to open their markets to us. It was a bad bill. You bet I voted against it.
And your rebuttal now, Mr. Yalamanchili.
The majority of Republicans disagreed with Congresswoman Schmidt. So as much as she likes to play the sides, well, let me throw that right back at you. 99, the majority of your Republicans voted for the bill. It's really that simple. The bill wasn't perfect. You're 100% right. And on this, one of the few things we do agree. It did not address intellectual theft, forced technology transfer. But here you also see one of the biggest differences between us. You think everything started in the last 2 years. I think it's been a gradual erosion over a decade plus. We've failed to stay competitive as a country with our tax, regulatory, and trade policies.
Thank you, Mr. Yalamanchili. We'll have to leave it there. Ray Cookless of the Inquirer has the next question for Mrs. Schmidt.
Some say the stimulus package kept the nation from sliding into a full-blown depression. Others say that it simply added to that $13 trillion debt and just simply didn't work. You've already indicated that you agree with that latter group. Given that, what would a better strategy have been, and how do we fix it now?
Well, first off, the President said that in passing this, we wouldn't go above 8%. Well, 9.5% nationally and over 10% in Ohio. I think we've surpassed that 8% threshold. But more importantly, this was a bill that didn't do much to really grow the economy. In fact, it only added government jobs and enhanced bureaucracy's payroll accounts. But what it didn't do was move the country forward. The parts of it that were supposed to be brick and mortar, the shovel-ready parts of this, had a mandate of 180 days. So instead of building roads and bridges, all we did was blacktop existing highways. And we saddled our nation and our future children and grandchildren with a $1.2 trillion deficit. What we needed to do, Ray, was to put certainty back into the marketplace. I hate keeping to say this, but that's what the business folks are telling me. When you've got a government that continues to change the rules of the game, people aren't going to invest in America. They want to know what the rules are. Then they'll live with the rules. But why would you expand your business, Ray? Why would you add a new person when you don't know what the cost of health care is going to be? You don't know whether this cap and trade policy is going to go through. You don't know what the financial bill is going to do to you and your ability to get credit or to be able to invest in markets. You don't know what future problems are going to arise with the deficit and how we attack it and how we pay for it.
I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. Mr. Yalamanchili, you have 90 seconds to respond.
Well, I'm sure it created a lot of uncertainty because 40% of the bill was tax cuts. And I know tax cuts really confuse a lot of people and inject so much uncertainty and scare business owners and individuals to death. I know it happens all the time, and I hear it from them all the time. 40% of this bill was tax cuts, was immediate tax cuts because the economy had fallen off a cliff. The infrastructure spending, again, here's one of the areas we actually do find some common ground. A lot of the infrastructure spending was wasted because we don't have a national infrastructure bank. Again, a failure of both parties. We don't have a prioritized list of the projects we need to invest in. Our own infrastructure is rated a D by our Corps of Engineers. When you look at that and you look at failed sewer systems and roads and highways that are crumbling, you're right, we did blacktop some roads and replace bulbs. That was a waste. And other parts of the bill was pork. But look, we needed tax cuts at that time so you put money back in people's projects and back into people's pockets. And we did need some kind of projects, infrastructure-wise, in order to help stimulate spending. Now, the real problem is we don't have an infrastructure bank. We need that in order to prioritize projects and to keep pork to a minimum. But as long as we play partisan politics, we won't get that. When you have that, you take away the fact that how these projects are funded is based on seniority and who sits on what committee and who's been in Washington the longest. I think who's been in Washington the longest is probably a decree as to how ineffective they are, and not that they should be handing out a huge contract. So if we really wanted the stimulus to be more effective, we should have actually implemented it in the right way.
Rebuttal, Mrs. Schmidt?
Well, the problem with those so-called tax cuts that were in the stimulus bill is in one instance it said we'll give you a tax break if you hire somebody, but the tax break didn't even cover the cost of what you were going to have in accruing that person on your payroll. But the real problem is that the stimulus didn't move our country forward. In fact, I believe it's moved our country backward because it saddled our future with a $1.2 trillion deficit that somebody's going to have to pay for. And guess who that somebody is? You and me.
Thank you, Mrs. Schmidt. Marianne Zalesnik of WVXU has our next question for Mr. Yalamanchili.
Mr. Yalamanchili, following up on a question Tom asked earlier about dealing with the unemployment, and there's talk certainly that everyone believes, and I think is true across the country, that more jobs are needed in this country. But even if something happens and jobs are suddenly able to be created, it's going to take time for all of those jobs to come into place. What can you do now to help those people who are unemployed, who have been looking for a job for more than a year, some cases 2 years looking for work? What can you offer to them now while they're waiting for some of these jobs to be created?
I think it's a great question, and I think the first thing we need to do is to realize that we've let our infrastructure atrophy. And what I mean by infrastructure, it's not just roads and tunnels. It's also things like job training programs for advanced manufacturing. We need to get to work on making sure we have those programs available so that if it is green energy or what have you, the next manufacturing jobs that are there, we can start to train those people and those jobs are available. We don't want to be in a situation where, say, we do get our trade, tax, and regulatory conditions right, and these jobs do start to come back, and we do start to see our economy turn around. You don't want to have a gap between jobs that are open and skills that are there. So we need to be investing in these programs so people who don't want handouts, they want the opportunity to work hard, that they can start building those skills. So when the economy does recover, they can get to work. But those are some of the programs that have been cut over the past decade that have really weakened. So we need to be using our community college system more effectively, and I think that's one of the ways in which we could do that. In countries like Germany, which have recovered much faster than our own, what they have is the most advanced worker training program in the world. They have advanced manufacturing training, so that way workers are always kept on the cutting edge of technologies that are available. And so in addition to extending unemployment benefits, which I think Congress has done and that I think my opponent has voted against, this is what we need to do. We need to make sure that people are ready to work hard at these jobs that come available.
Mrs. Schmidt, your response.
Well, when anyone loses a job, it's a tragedy not just to the family, but to the community. And what we have to do is show them the resources that are out there when they're in this hopefully temporary situation. And sometimes those resources are tied to charitable giving. And so we have to make sure that the policies Washington puts in place don't stop charitable giving, but allow charitable giving to continue. But having said that, I do believe that we have to put in place policies right now that will give the investors in America the confidence to grow jobs. You know, if tomorrow we walked back to Washington and said, we're going to get rid of health care, we're not going to do cap and trade, I can guarantee you the money would start flowing. And once the money starts flowing, that small little business guy that's been teetering about whether to make the next move and hire the next person so he can get the next order, he's going to do it. And when he does it, that's a job. That's the way America works. But when you have a playing field where people don't know what the rules are, they walk away from the game. Let's level the playing field. Let's put consistency in it. Let's give them the rule book. And believe me, jobs will grow, and they'll grow more quickly than you and I could ever anticipate.
30 seconds, Mr. Yalamanchili.
I think this is a great example, again, of soundbite politics. This is, again, the soundbite of uncertainty, and just keep repeating it as many times as you can. The economy was heading off a cliff in 2008 before there was any uncertainty. What you have is a problem of demand. Consumers spent too much. We were overextended. Instead of saving, we spent. We borrowed on cheap credit. That's the real problem. And right now, there's not demand because people are right now paying down credit card debt and are trying to pay down their home to keep their home. That's the issue. This is fantasy when we say this is all going to be fixed when you have consistency. It's soundbite politics, and it's failed us.
Thank you, sir. Now to another question that was sent to us online. How would you reform how political campaigns are financed? That question to Mrs. Schmidt, and you have 90 seconds.
You know, if I had a magic wand, I would take money out of the equation, but I don't. And what is interesting is when we talk about reforming campaign finance, we forget one factor, the fact that this Constitution gives the American public the right to participate in the process. Now, Congress limits itself to the amount of money that it can accept, whether it's a special interest group or it's from a person. Those are rules that we put in place for ourselves. But I believe it goes against the Constitution to say that the American public can't participate in this election process in the ways that they want to. Now, I know what my opponent's going to say. Yeah, but you got all these special interest groups out there doing all these things. You're always going to have it. And any time you try to reform or correct it, you're either going to get slapped down like they were at the Supreme Court with the Citizens United decision, or they're going to find other ways to put money into the process. I say, let's freshen the air. Let's allow the public to participate. But when they participate, let's know who's participating and how much they're participating. Let's clear the air. We've got the internet. We know what people put on a campaign. But to say that we can take money out of the equation, it's just not going to happen.
Your response, Mr. Yalamanchili.
Well, I'll actually try to answer the question. There's a bill in Congress, the Fair Elections Act. I would be very supportive of that, which would be an optional, an opt-in method that you could opt into public financing to run for office. Let me get back to soundbite politics, because, again, this is really about just the failed soundbite politics of Washington. Free speech, it's in the Constitution. Corporations do not have free speech. I mean, corporations can't vote, and this notion that they should be able to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to push any point of view that they want is kind of crazy. And when we look at $3.5 billion spent lobbying Washington last year, it was the cover of Time magazine in August, and it said the best laws that money can buy. There's a reason that we don't trust Washington. There's a reason that we think it's broken, because we know it's rigged. Heads, I win. Tails, you lose. That's how it works in Washington. And as long as we let the people fund the elections, the corporations fund the elections, basically they're going to be the ones that get answered to. And $3.5 billion flowing to Washington, $1.5 million that my opponent's taken. I haven't taken a single penny in special interest money, only individual donations. I'm the only person running for federal office, the only major campaign in the country who has refused all federal, all PAC contributions, all committee contributions, all individual donations. Because I believe that strongly that this isn't a Republican issue, this isn't a Democratic issue. Both parties have failed. This is an issue about regular people, working people, having their voices heard, and taking back our democracy.
Mrs. Schmidt, 30 seconds to rebut.
Thank you. The bill my opponent refers to actually picks winners and losers, and unfortunately it allows the special interests of the Democratic Party to get the edge up on the bill on campaign finance, because what it says is it says that only certain groups will be allowed to participate if you meet certain qualifications, and that's not fair in the process. Again, anytime you try to write a new policy, you pick winners and losers. Let's allow the American public to participate. That's their constitutional right.
Thank you. The next question will come from Tom McKee. It is a question for Mr. Yalamanchili, and both candidates, you now have 1 minute and 15 seconds for this response. Tom.
Thank you, Clyde. Keeping in mind that hundreds of young men and women from the 2nd District are serving overseas in the military right now, and keeping in mind that we have a massive deficit on our hands, what defense spending cuts would you support, and what is an appropriate timetable to bring the war in Afghanistan to a close?
Yeah, and I think that it's unfortunate that throughout this campaign I've seen that the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq, which is now ended, but it's barely been reported on. And that's a tragedy. I think we've got a lot of men and women who are serving honorably, and they should be recognized for that. And so I just want to point that out. I think the general's plan right now, General Petraeus, to train the Afghans to defend their own land, and we're going to come back. The job of the American military is not to nation build. And I think when you start to talk about where are we going to cut spending, we've way overreached in terms of our military policy, in terms of we're building up other nations nations when we know our own nation is falling apart, when we know our infrastructure is rated a D by our own government. And so when you look at our defense spending, which is staggeringly high, it's the biggest part of our budget, it's a third. We spend more on defense spending than every other country on earth put together. You look there and you say, what is our mandate? And that is to protect Americans, to protect American interests. It is not to nation build. It is not just to go to war at the slightest provocation. And so we need to be defending American interests above all else, and we are not doing that.
All right, Mrs. Schmidt, you have a minute and 15 seconds.
You know, this is a very serious issue, and I've had the opportunity to visit Afghanistan on numerous occasions. And one of the things I'm unwilling to do is to undercut our military. And therefore, I'm very reluctant to cut defense spending at this time, unless I find where it is wasteful or unnecessary. But having said that, you also asked about the war in Afghanistan. You know, one of the things I agree with the President on is this strategy, the Petraeus strategy, because it has worked in Iraq. And they are on the way to being an independent nation that is stable. But what we have to do is to make sure that we have the resources necessary in Afghanistan for the Petraeus plan to work. The thing I disagree with the President on is his arbitrary timeline. I don't want to be there forever, and I do want to see measures of success, but I'm unwilling to say that it ends at a date certain. I truly believe we need to give the Petraeus the tools necessary to make his plan work in Afghanistan in a similar fashion to the way it has worked in Iraq.
Rebuttal.
Yeah, I think this is a great example. So I've said, absolutely, let's give General Petraeus' plan some time to work. But here, let's use common sense. Tax cuts, let's extend all tax cuts, $4 trillion. Let's do more tax cuts. I don't want to cut defense spending. Yet these are by far the biggest parts of our budget. I mean, you're talking 60% of what the deficit would be plus. You're talking massive trillions of dollars. Yet one side of our mouth we're saying, look, I'm serious about the debt, let's cut it. The other side, I don't want to cut defense spending and tax cuts for everybody. Let's do more and more and more tax cuts. Arithmetic works whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, and we've forgotten that.
All right, Mr. Yalamanchili, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And that concludes our questions for now. We're going to go to the closing statements, I should say. Each candidate will have 2 minutes. We begin with Mrs. Schmidt.
I want to thank everyone for participating in this debate. As I said at the opening, this is an important election because I believe that the United States has come to a fork in the road. We can choose to continue the current spending spree that the Democrats have been on. We can choose to continue to saddle businesses with more job-killing regulations and stifling tax policies. And we can continue to heap more debt on the backs of our children and grandchildren. But I say there's a better road, one that leads to greater prosperity for our nation. And we can begin that process by reducing the federal spending and moving towards a balanced budget. We can choose to move this country forward by instilling confidence in our investors so they actually create jobs for us. And we can repeal the health care law and replace it with one that is actually going to make health care costs go down. And we can get rid of the tax and spend policies and the cap-and-trade legislation that will actually pick winners and losers and not remove us on our reliance of foreign oil. But most of all, we can put control in back of the hands where it belongs, the American public. The decision next week is crystal clear. We can continue down the same road of failed policies, policies not pushed or voted on by me, or we can take a new road, a road that leads to a brighter future and greater prosperity. I'm taking that road. I've been taking that road. And I'm going to ask you to join me and vote for me on November the 2nd. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Schmidt. Mr. Yalamanchili, 2 minutes.
I think there's our choice. We heard it right there. We can go towards sound bites, rhetoric, partisan bickering. When I compared my opponent to Nancy Pelosi, that's what I meant. It's all politics. It's always the other side's fault. It's all about demonization. It's not about solutions. You could go right now to my opponent's website, just Google Gene Schmidt. You won't find a single issue up there. Not a single policy stand. None of that. You go to my website, you'll find 20, 30, 40, I don't know. Actual detailed positions where I tell you, here's my solution. Here's my proposed idea that I want to work with Republicans on and Democrats to try to move this country forward. You hear rhetoric like picking winners and losers, my opponent just used. She didn't mind picking winners or losers when she bailed out the banks with nearly $1 trillion. This is just standard partisan rhetoric. I don't fault her for it, but it's part of a failed system in Washington that we need to move beyond. That it matters all that matters is, do you have an R next to your name or do you have a D? And as long as it says R or a D, it doesn't matter whether you're actually effective, whether you're accountable. Throughout this race in the past year, as I've gone across this vast 2nd District, I've found my voice. I found my voice in the senior citizen who told me that she's worried for her grandson. What kind of world is he going to grow up in? What kind of country when we have record debt, when we have unemployment that's staggering as jobs go overseas? To a college student who said, I've done everything that was asked for me at nearby Claremont College, UC Claremont. Said, I did everything that was asked of me. I studied hard. I went to college. Now I have debt, and it's been a year since I could find a job. I don't believe that our problems were caused in this last 2 years. And if you do, if you think all of the problems are debt, our unemployment, the decimation of our manufacturing base was all caused in the last 2 years, you know what? Go ahead and vote for my opponent, Congresswoman Schmidt. I encourage you to. If you think this is reflective of failed policies that have gone on for years, for decades, then you know what? I would ask you for your vote, because I've put forward solutions. I have tried to stay away from partisan bickering and slamming the other side, because that will not move our country forward. We are at a fork in the road, and I pray to God that we choose the right one.
Thank you, Mr. Yalamanchili. Appreciate your comments. Our thanks to the candidates for their time with us tonight. Early voting has begun in Ohio. You can contact your local Board of Elections for the hours at your local Board of Elections. Election Day, 1 week from today, November 2nd. The polls will be open from 6:30 a.m. until 7:30 p.m. If you missed any part of tonight's debate, you can watch online at WCPO.com. We'll have complete election night coverage for you Tuesday night on 9 News, and we'll bring you continuous coverage on digital channel 9.2. That's the Time Warner channel 22. You'll also get the results instantly on WCPO.com and 9 Mobile. We want to thank the Glen Estey Performing Arts Center for hosting us this evening, as well as the debate sponsors this evening. And this reminder, we encourage you to vote on November the 2nd. We hope we have helped you make an informed decision when you do so. Finally, this is the last in a series of debates that we'll present this year. A lot of people worked hard to bring these to you. On their behalf, I'm Clyde Gray, wishing you a good night.